73 BC. A little over 70 men, armed with nothing but kitchen knives and meat spits, break out of a gladiator school in Capua. 2 years later, that handful of escapees will have grown into an army of up to 120,000 people. They'll defeat multiple Roman armies in a row. They'll march the length and breadth of Italy, and they'll make the most powerful military machine in the ancient world feel something it hadn't felt in its own backyard in a very long time. Real, unmasked fear. Their leader was a man named Spartacus, a slave, a gladiator, and, by every indication history left behind, one of the most gifted military commanders the ancient world ever produced. He just happened to be born on the wrong side of Roman society. This is a story about how far you can go when the only thing you have left to lose is your chains. We know almost nothing about Spartacus's life before the revolt, and that gap tells you something on its own. Roman historians simply didn't think a slave's biography was worth writing down in detail. What little survives suggests he was from Thrace, a region in the Balkans, possibly served in a Roman auxiliary unit at some point, and then either deserted or was captured and sold into slavery. He ends up at a gladiator school in Capua, owned by a man named Lentulus Batiatus. Gladiator schools weren't training camps in any normal sense. They were death factories built for public entertainment. Men fed and trained just well enough to kill each other beautifully in the arena, until, eventually, one of them didn't walk out. In 73 BC, a group of roughly 70 to 80 gladiators, Spartacus among them, plot an escape. The plan is close to suicidal. Seize kitchen tools, fight through the guards, and run. They don't have real weapons in any conventional sense, just whatever they can grab from a gladiator school's kitchen. It turns out to be enough. They break out, and on the way they manage to ambush and seize actual weapons and armor from a supply wagon Rome sends to intercept them. A small first win. From there, the escapees dig in on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. Yes, the same volcano that will bury Pompeii a century and a half later, but for now, just a convenient natural fortress with one narrow path leading up. Rome's response is exactly what you'd expect for a band of runaway slaves, which is to say, barely a response at all. Instead of a legion, they send a relatively small force under a praetor named Claudius Glaber, with orders simply to seal off the one path up the mountain and starve them out. It will turn out to be the first of many, many mistakes Rome makes underestimating this particular slave. First victories. Spartacus solves the siege problem with a level of tactical elegance that should make anyone rethink who the real professional soldier in this story actually was. His men weave ladders out of wild grapevines growing on the mountainside, climb down a sheer cliff face on the far side of Vesuvius, a route the Romans hadn't even bothered to guard, because they assumed the climb down was physically impossible, and come out directly behind Glaber's camp. The surprise attack on a completely unprepared, thoroughly demoralized force ends in a rout. It's the rebels' first real victory, and word of it spreads across Italy like wildfire. People start flocking to Spartacus, not just escaped gladiators, shepherds, agricultural slaves, poor free men who had nothing left to lose either. The army grows from dozens to thousands to tens of thousands. Ancient historians offer wildly different estimates, but at its peak, Spartacus's forces likely numbered somewhere between 70,000 and 120,000 people, a number comparable to an entire Roman consular army, except made up of people Rome officially didn't even classify as human beings. Military genius. What happens next should have been impossible. A band of runaway slaves starts systematically defeating regular Roman forces. In 72 BC, Spartacus beats several praetorian armies in a row, and then, in a development that would have been almost unthinkable, defeats the forces of both sitting consuls of that year in separate engagements. For context, consul was the highest military and political office in the Roman Republic. Losing to a slave wasn't just a military defeat. It was a full-blown political catastrophe and a national humiliation, both at once. Historians still argue about what Spartacus's actual strategic plan was. One of the leading theories? He never intended to fight Rome to the death at all. He wanted to lead his people north through Italy, across the Alps, and disperse them safely back home, to Gaul, to Thrace, anywhere far away from slavery. Ancient sources claim he actually got his army almost to the foot of the Alps in 72 BC, and then, for reasons that still aren't fully clear, turned back south, deeper into Italy. Maybe part of his army refused to leave, wanting to plunder Italy itself instead. Maybe he was counting on more recruits joining from the south. We don't have a definitive answer, but that decision to turn back is probably, in the end, what cost him everything. Rome changes the rules. By the end of 72 BC, Rome finally understands. This isn't a police action against runaway slaves anymore. This is a full-scale war being fought on Roman soil. The Senate hands the job of crushing the rebellion to Marcus Licinius Crassus. At the time, likely the wealthiest man in Rome, and a man desperate for military glory to match the political weight of rivals like Pompey. Crassus takes command of 8 legions, an enormous concentrated force even by Roman standards, and reinstates decimation within his own army. An ancient, almost forgotten punishment where every 10th soldier in a unit that showed cowardice in battle is executed by his own comrades, chosen by lot. It's a brutal measure by any standard, but it sends one unmistakable message. From now on, retreat is more terrifying than dying in the fight. Step by step, methodically, Crassus pushes Spartacus's army south toward the very toe of the Italian boot, the region of Bruttium, near the Strait of Messina. Spartacus even tries striking a deal with Cilician pirates to ferry part of his army across to Sicily, where major slave uprisings had broken out decades earlier and sympathetic locals might still remain. The pirates take the payment and simply never show up. One more detail that adds to the tragedy: Spartacus wasn't only surrounded by Roman legions, he was surrounded by ordinary human betrayal too. Crassus builds a massive ditch and rampart clear across the peninsula, roughly 35 to 40 miles long by most estimates, trying to physically seal Spartacus's army into the south of Italy, like an animal in a trap. The breakout and the end. On a winter night, Spartacus manages something that once again should have been impossible. Part of his army breaks through Crassus's fortifications, filling in the ditch with dirt, branches, and the bodies of slaughtered animals, and escapes into open territory. The pursuit drags on for several more weeks until, in 71 BC, the exact location is still debated by historians, somewhere along the upper Silaris River in southern Italy, the final battle takes place. By this point, the odds are hopelessly stacked. The rebels are exhausted, some units have splintered off to act on their own, and now they're facing not just Crassus's legions, but Pompey's forces as well, arriving from the north. The very political rival Crassus had been racing against this entire campaign to outshine. Ancient sources describe Spartacus's final stand almost like something out of legend. When a horse was brought to him for a possible escape, he supposedly killed the animal on the spot, saying that if he won, he'd have plenty of enemy horses to choose from. And if he lost, he wouldn't need one at all. He charges directly into the thick of the fighting, trying to personally reach Crassus, cuts down several centurions along the way, and dies in the melee. His body is never identified among the thousands left on the battlefield. The price of defeat. What happens next becomes one of the most recognizable images of cruelty to survive from the ancient world. 6,000 surviving rebels are taken prisoner. Crassus crucifies every single one of them, alive, on crosses. Lining the Appian Way, the main road running from southern Italy straight into Rome, for roughly 120 miles. The distance is deliberate. Anyone traveling toward the capital would pass this site for days on end. This wasn't just an execution. It was a message stretched across an entire highway, built to say one thing, over and over, mile after mile. This is what happens to anyone who raises a hand against Rome, no matter who you were born as. The takeaway. Spartacus never freed a single slave permanently. He never changed Rome's slave system. He never won the war. By the cold arithmetic of history, this was a defeat, and one of the most brutally punctuated defeats the ancient world ever recorded. And yet it remains one of the most retold stories in human history, because the point was never really the final score. The point is that a man the system officially classified as barely more than a talking tool picked up a kitchen knife, built an army out of people the world called nothing but tools like him, and made the most powerful empire on earth genuinely afraid in its own backyard for the first time in a very long time. 2,000 years later, we still remember his name. The names of the men who crucified him are remembered by far fewer people.